After fleeing Ukraine to escape the ongoing war with Russia, 23-year-old Irina Zarutska met an unexpectedly violent fate in August of 2025 when she was stabbed to death on a light rail in Charlotte, North Carolina. The incident occurred in the city's South End neighborhood, where Zarutska could be seen sitting in front of a man who was later identified as 34-year-old Decarlos Brown Jr. 4.5 minutes into the ride, the suspect pulled a knife and attacked the young woman, stabbing her 3 times for no apparent reason, including in the middle of her throat. He then walked away as the victim bled to death from her wounds. Zarutska and Brown did not know each other prior to the deadly assault, according to investigators, who say that the two had no apparent interactions leading up to the seemingly random attack. Police captured Brown shortly after the stabbing, and he has since been indicted on a first-degree murder charge. The defendant has a lengthy criminal record, including at least 1 previous arrest for assaulting a woman and a 6-year prison stint for robbery and breaking and entering. He's currently in custody at the Mecklenburg County Jail as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 30. Majorjon Kaylor. After learning that his teenage neighbor had supposedly exposed themselves to his daughter, Majorjon Kaylor snapped and massacred the young man's entire household with a .45 caliber pistol. Police responded to the scene in Kellogg, Idaho on Father's Day in 2023 after receiving a report about a neighborly dispute, and arrived to find 65-year-old Kenneth Guadipe, his daughter 41-year-old Kenna Guadipe, and Kenna's 2 teenage children, Devin and Aiken Smith, dead from gunshot wounds to their head. Kaylor, who was 31 years old at the time, was arrested at the scene and later charged with 4 murders. He had only been living next door to the victims for several weeks prior to the quadruple homicide, but the 2 households were already having problems with one another. Less than a week before the killings, Kaylor had accused 18-year-old Devin Smith of standing in full view of his wife and daughter while unclothed and touching himself inappropriately. At the time of the shooting, the case was awaiting review by the prosecutor to determine whether the authorities would move forward with criminal charges. Following his arrest, Kaylor confessed to killing the victims, telling police that he had tried speaking with Kenna and Kenneth about Devin's alleged inappropriate conduct, but they didn't seem to take the matter seriously. Overcome by rage, he committed the slayings in a bid to execute vengeance against the family. Kaylor pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree murder in December of 2023 and was sentenced in March of 2024 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 29. Aaron Hurtt and Teriq Coleman. What began as a fight between 2 groups of people with bats and makeshift weapons erupted into deadly violence when a man gave the signal to shoot from the porch of a nearby home. The altercation unfolded in the streets of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, on an April evening in 2025, where a man later identified as 23-year-old Aaron Hurtt was reportedly seen making a slashing motion across his neck with his finger. Moments later, Hurtt and a second suspect, 22-year-old Teriq Coleman, allegedly rushed at 26-year-old Omar Wilson Jr. and shot at him with handguns as he approached the street corner. According to reports, Wilson survived the initial gunshots and was trying to stand up when Hurtt stood over him and emptied the clip into him, killing him at the scene. Hurtt and Coleman then fled the scene, prompting the authorities to issue a warrant for their arrests on suspicion of murder, conspiracy, and gun charges. The pair quickly landed on local law enforcement's most wanted list, but they remained at large for several weeks before being arrested in Harrisburg on May 5th. Hurtt is currently detained without bail at the Dauphin County Jail, while Coleman remains in custody at the same facility in lieu of bonds totaling $550,000. Number 28. Blake Scanlon. In January of 2019, 23-year-old Blake Scanlon called 911 from a Westfield, Massachusetts apartment and said that he was seriously injured. Officers rushed to the residence where they found Scanlon suffering from multiple lacerations. Inside the home, police discovered the murdered body of Scanlon's estranged girlfriend and the mother of his child, 20-year-old Alexis Avery, who had been stabbed 28 times. After receiving treatment for his own injuries, Scanlon was booked into custody and charged with murder, domestic assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. According to investigators, Avery had ended the relationship 10 days earlier, and Scanlon stalked the victim to 2 bars in the hours leading up to her death. After finding Avery in the back of a pickup truck with another man, he returned to the apartment where he stabbed her to death later that evening. While awaiting trial in county lockup, Scanlon accrued additional criminal charges for plotting to kill a witness and a prosecutor in the case. In the meantime, the murder case languished in the court for 5 years, before finally going to trial in the spring of 2024. After deliberating for less than a day, the jury found Scanlon guilty of first-degree murder and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. He was sentenced to life without parole and appears to be awaiting trial in the murder-for-hire case. Number 27. Tyrek Burton. 37-year-old Tyrek Burton's marriage ended on his wedding day in October of 2024 when he was murdered after exchanging vows with his girlfriend of 16 years, Kiara, at the Barber Park Events Center in Greensboro, North Carolina. Police responded to the scene shortly before 9 p.m. and discovered his bullet-riddled body in the parking lot, where a gunman had approached Burton and shot him 15 times. Life-saving efforts proved futile, leaving Kiara a widow just hours after tying the knot. No arrests have been made in a case which stemmed from a road rage incident involving a stranger who felt that Burton had cut him off. Speaking to Fox 8 in April of 2025, Kiara said that she remains determined to achieve justice for her husband, telling the network that she had canvassed the neighborhood in hopes of finding answers. She urged anyone with information to come forward, stating that she doesn't think someone would commit this type of act and not tell anyone about it. Law enforcement has also encouraged members of the public to help by contacting Crime Stoppers with tips on the case. Number 26. Brian Earl Johnston. Fearing for her life, 27-year-old mother of 3, Kelly Wilkinson, sought help from police in Queensland, Australia, during the spring of 2021 after being repeatedly assaulted by her estranged husband, 37-year-old Brian Earl Johnston. Just weeks later, she was found stabbed to death, bound and lit on fire in the backyard of her Gold Coast home. The estranged couple had a troubled history which began 10 years earlier after they met online in 2011. Wilkinson traveled to America to meet Johnston, a former U.S. Marine, and the two married just a month later. Domestic abuse soon followed, and Wilkinson eventually moved back to Australia with the couple's children. Johnston followed her there and persuaded her to reconcile, leading to years of continued mistreatment. In the months leading up to her murder, Wilkinson had started confiding to family members about the abuse, with support from her loved ones. She asked Johnston to move out and eventually went to law enforcement. Johnston was charged with 4 domestic violence-related crimes and 2 protective orders were issued in Wilkinson's favor, but she remained fearful of her estranged husband as his mental state proceeded to unravel. A witness would later describe Johnston's downward spiral in court, stating that he adamantly denied the abuse allegations while ignoring their advice to give Wilkinson space. On the night of the murder, he forced his way into Wilkinson's home where he tied her up, stabbed her, doused the body in gasoline and set her ablaze. Johnston pleaded guilty to murder in February of 2024 and received a mandatory life term with a minimum non-parole period of 20 years. While imposing the sentence, the judge overseeing the case acknowledged that it was not enough for the horrendous crime, but that the law limited him from handing down a more severe punishment. Number 25. Christopher Lindsey. After enduring 18 years of abuse at the hands of her partner, 40-year-old Kristen Stevens ended her relationship with 42-year-old Christopher Lindsey. She obtained a restraining order against Lindsey in November of 2024, but it failed to stop him from forcing his way into her Chilauta, Florida home with a hammer and murdering her in front of their teenage son. After stabbing Stevens more than 70 times with a kitchen knife and injuring a second victim who tried to intervene during the attack, Lindsey fled the scene in a vehicle. He died hours later in a rollover crash in Orange County. Authorities later revealed that on the day of Stevens' murder, Lindsey was due to be arraigned in court on a domestic violence battery charge stemming from an incident that had occurred a month earlier. Following his initial arrest, the judge had released him from custody under the conditions that he had no contact with Stevens and stayed away from her home, where they had lived together for most of their relationship. According to the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, Lindsey killed Stevens just hours after learning that she had been on a date with another man, whom she had met through a dating app. He had a documented history of domestic violence, including multiple previous arrests, leading some to wonder why he was free in the first place at the time of the murder. In the aftermath of the seemingly preventable tragedy, Stevens' mother called for heightened legal protections for domestic violence victims in Florida and the US, noting during an interview with local station WESH that survivors are especially at risk between court dates, which gives their abusers the opportunity to plan and carry out their vengeance. Number 24. The murder of Brandon Vern Hurst. A pair of joggers in northern Idaho made a horrifying discovery in December of 2020 when they spotted a partially wrapped human body at the bottom of a 15 to 20 foot embankment near Sandpoint. The remains belonged to 38-year-old Brandon Vern Hurst, who had gone missing weeks earlier. He had been shot multiple times, wrapped in a camouflage tarp, and pushed down the embankment on a utility sled. Investigators soon turned their focus toward Hurst's former girlfriend and ongoing love interest, 28-year-old Cantrip Billette Gattens, who had called the victim for help with her vehicle on the day that he was last seen alive. Another one of the woman's suitors told detectives that Gattens had accused Hurst of hitting her and being a police informant. The unnamed informant said he was riding in a vehicle with Gattens and 59-year-old Neil Aaron Mosso when he learned of their plot to murder Hurst. He claimed that he begged the pair not to act on their plans, but they told him the decision had already been made. Gattens lured Hurst to his death under the guise of having car trouble, according to the witness, who told police that Mosso emerged from hiding and opened fire on the victim while he sat in the front seat of his PT Cruiser. 8 days after the discovery of Hurst's body, the vehicle was found abandoned in a storage lot with blood spatter on the interior. Over the following weeks, authorities arrested Mosso on suspicion of first-degree murder, while Gattens was charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. A third suspect, 62-year-old Scott Thomas Cashel, faced an accessory charge after admitting to investigators that he had disposed of Hurst's body. Records show that Mosso was convicted of second-degree murder and is serving a life sentence. Gattens entered an offered plea to a reduced second-degree kidnapping charge and was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. Cashel also took a plea deal and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for being an accessory to murder. He admitted in court that he had dumped Hurst's body, claiming that he was afraid the other suspects would kill him if he refused to comply, and that he failed to report Hurst's death because he was afraid he would be charged with murder. Number 23. Norman Smart. While responding to a reported death at a Wilmington Island, Georgia home on the morning of June 7, 2014, police discovered the murdered body of 34-year-old Lauren Brown Smart. The emergency call had come from Lauren's husband, Norman Smart, who prosecutors would later accuse of beating the hell out of and strangling the victim during her final moments. Lauren had suffered numerous injuries indicative of a violent end, including chest fractures, contusions, and a brain bleed. Despite this, Norman insisted that he had woken up to find his wife dead on the floor of the master bedroom. Authorities gleaned key information from the couple's young son, who recalled hearing his mother yelling, "Stop," amid sounds that he described as loud thunder. Further investigation turned up messages Lauren had sent to Norman shortly before her death, stating that he wasn't the person she had married and that she was sick of his abuse. She sent her last text message at 2:13 a.m. on the day of her murder, stating, "You're a terrible husband." A friend later testified that Lauren had sought refuge at her home on multiple occasions, at one point showing up at the residence with a black eye and covered in bruises. It was evident in Lauren's own words that she feared for her life, with a letter that was found in the couple's trash stating that she believed Norman enjoyed beating her. Norman denied killing his wife but was charged with 8 crimes, including 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of malice murder, 2 counts of aggravated battery, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 1 count of cruelty to children. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life without parole, but continued to maintain his innocence and has never admitted guilt in Lauren's death, even after unsuccessfully appealing his case. Number 22. The murder of Justina Altamirano Mosso. On a Saturday evening in November of 2014, 19-year-old Justina Altamirano Mosso was found dead in a pool of blood in the bathroom of her Lawrence, Kansas apartment. Her hair was soaked in blood, and there was a broken toilet lid on the floor, making it clear that she had met a violent end. An autopsy later found that Mosso had been bludgeoned in the head and stabbed repeatedly in the face, head, and neck. She was also covered in defensive wounds, leaving no doubt that she had fought for her life until the very end. Mosso's estranged husband, Felipe Cantu Ruiz, naturally landed at the top of the suspects list. The former couple had recently separated after Ruiz learned that Mosso was seeing another man, and they had argued over money on the day of the murder, but Ruiz denied ever harming his wife, and prosecutors would later argue that phone records proved he was nowhere near the crime scene when Mosso was killed. Investigators soon turned their focus toward 19-year-old Rontaris Washington Jr., who lived down the hall from Mosso at the time of her death. Washington admitted to entering Mosso's apartment in search of items to steal on the day of the killing, but claimed that he left empty-handed after finding the young woman dead. He said he had seen Mosso and Ruiz arguing in the parking lot earlier that day, and willingly provided a DNA sample for comparison to a profile that was found at the crime scene. Despite Washington's cooperation, he was charged with first-degree murder and booked into the Douglas County Jail, where he spent the next 5 years fighting for his innocence. He remained in county lockup even after the first trial ended in a hung jury in 2019, and was finally released on bond in 2020. The charges against him were dropped the following year, and Mosso's murder remains unsolved to this day. Number 21. Deonte Tucker. While responding to a house fire during the early morning hours of July 12, 2023, police in Phoenix City, Alabama, found the charred and mutilated bodies of 20-year-old Matthew Chenna and 57-year-old Melvin Weir. Officers also found evidence that the victims had been murdered and that the fire had been started in an attempt to cover up the crime. The investigation led to a 32-year-old woman named Nia Alessimba Domenico, who reportedly admitted to entering the home with 42-year-old Deonte Dwayne Tucker. She claimed that Tucker had admitted to shooting Chenna and Weir multiple times for selling him bad drugs and hacking their bodies with axes before placing a blanket on the stove and setting the house ablaze. Tucker had been seen driving a vehicle belonging to one of the victims shortly after the double homicide, and he was in possession of Weir's driver's license during an unrelated police encounter that same night. But he managed to fly under the radar until several weeks later, when he and Domenico were arrested on capital murder charges in connection with the case. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty against Tucker, who remains held without bond at the Russell County Jail. Domenico also remains in custody, although it's unclear whether she faces the prospect of capital punishment for her alleged role in the killings. Number 20. Dwayne Cummings. Less than an hour after 38-year-old John Carl Tuxford was found shot 5 times in his vehicle on a January afternoon in 2016, police in Manatee County, Florida, discovered the body of his girlfriend, 23-year-old Jordan Finlan, who had been stabbed more than 30 times. Investigators cracked the cases with help from a confidential informant who revealed that the couple had recently stolen $800 from the home of a 38-year-old acquaintance named Dwayne Cummings, who Finlan had been staying with at the time of the murders. The day after the burglary, Cummings shared his suspicions against Finlan with a friend, Frederick "Freddie" Douglas, who lured the young woman to a meeting with the promise of heroin. As Finlan and Tuxford arrived at the designated location, Cummings already ran toward their vehicle while opening fire on the pair. Tuxford was later found hanging out of the Jeep with a bullet wound to the head. In the meantime, Finlan was forced into a vehicle and driven to the site, where her body was later found. Witnesses later testified to seeing Cummings punch and stab Finlan after she admitted to the theft. Cummings, Douglas, and a third suspect, Ahmad Dunbar, then changed clothes, cleaned the blood off themselves, and threw the murder weapons into the Manatee River. Dunbar later testified that the stabbing was so gruesome that he and Douglas crossed the street and vomited. In November of 2017, Cummings was found guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and armed kidnapping, resulting in an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Dunbar pleaded guilty to an accessory charge and was sentenced to a year of house arrest and a year of probation in exchange for his testimony against Cummings, and Douglas was never charged in connection with the case. Number 19. The murders of Saydi Abu Sheikh and Zakariya Jeilani Mohamed. On the night of October 25, 2022, a group of gang members stormed into a house in Ilford, East London, and brutally murdered a pair of aspiring rappers in a cold-blooded revenge killing, armed with guns and knives. The assailants shot and butchered 23-year-old Saydi Abu Sheikh and 31-year-old Zakariya Jeilani Mohamed, firing around 45 rounds in the process. Sheikh was stabbed 28 times and shot 4 times, while Mohamed suffered at least 7 bullet wounds and was stabbed 5 times. 2 other men escaped uninjured after running and hiding, while a third victim, Khalid, survived a gunshot wound to the head. The slayings were masterminded by a man named Zain Mirza to exact retribution for his brother's murder in 2019. Mirza stationed himself nearby while 21-year-old Chibuke Ohanwe, 20-year-old Ayanli Adan, and 22-year-old Mahad Guled carried out the carnage. In January of 2024, all 4 suspects were found guilty of double murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and perverting the course of justice. They were all sentenced to life with a minimum of 38 years, while a 5th defendant, Zakariya Mohamed, pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice and was ordered to serve 4 years in a young offenders institution. Number 18. Ian Levy. Just days after being discharged from a psychiatric hospital in March of 2019, 55-year-old Ian Levy murdered his wife in a fit of rage because he feared that she was going to leave him for someone better. Police responded to Levy's home in Hendon, North London, after receiving calls from neighbours about a woman screaming. At the scene, officers found 50-year-old Elise Stevens face down on the floor and covered in knife wounds. She had been stabbed 86 times with a kitchen knife that was found near her body. When law enforcement arrived at the home, Levy was completely unclothed and covered in blood. He blamed the mental hospital for his actions while being taken into custody for Stevens' murder, telling police, "They let me out when they knew I was depressed." Levy's psychiatric health landed at the center of the case, with the defense arguing that he was less culpable for the killing due to mental illness and that a manslaughter conviction would be more appropriate. The jury disagreed, and in August of 2019 he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 21 years before becoming eligible for parole. Number 17. Gilbert Villareal. Gilbert Yogi Villareal did the unthinkable in March of 2012 when he murdered his pregnant wife, Sheila Loams, in front of the couple's toddler son at their Phoenix apartment. Police arrived at the home to find the child crying but uninjured as he stood next to his slain 22-year-old mother, who had been stabbed 38 times. Neighbors had dialed 911 after overhearing Loams screaming for help, but by the time officers reached the scene, the victim was dead and Villareal had fled the scene. At the time of her murder, Loams was trying to leave her husband after suffering from years of domestic abuse at his hands. After she was killed, Villareal remained at large for more than 4 years before he was located in Mexico following his arrest for another domestic violence incident. After serving prison time in Mexico, he was extradited to Arizona to face long overdue justice for the deaths of his wife and unborn child. In 2023, more than 11 years after Loams was killed, Villareal pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 years behind bars with credit for more than 2 years of time served. He'll be 84 years old if he lives to see his scheduled release in 2071. Number 16. Dazzamon Jones. In an execution-style murder that was later described as worse than a firing squad, 34-year-old Edgar Lopez was shot dead in his car in Covington, Kentucky on August 8th of 2023. The incident began as a fight between Lopez and a man named Brian Gray, who approached the victim from behind and hit him on the head repeatedly with a brick. Lopez responded by smashing Gray's head against the ground several times and warning the man that he knew where he lived. Gray's friend, Dazzamon Raheem Jones, witnessed the altercation from inside a vehicle. As Gray stumbled away bleeding and injured, Jones followed Lopez to a nearby residence and opened fire with an AR-15, striking the victim 29 times as he emptied the entire magazine. Investigators later determined that Lopez was unarmed when he was shot. By the time law enforcement arrived at the scene, Jones had fled, prompting the authorities to issue a warrant for his arrest on a murder charge. He turned himself in 4 days later, claiming that he believed Lopez was trying to kill Gray when he decided to intervene. Taking the stand in his own defense during his trial in July of 2024, Jones told the court that he believed Lopez had a gun while admitting that he never actually saw a weapon in the victim's possession. He insisted that he never intended to kill Lopez and was just trying to stop him from killing Gray, but the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to life without parole. Number 15. Mobile Revenge Campaign. in what federal prosecutors later described as a relentless campaign of revenge. 2 innocent people were killed and 6 others were injured in a string of shootings that occurred in Mobile, Alabama, throughout 2022. According to U.S. attorneys, 30-year-old John Fitzgerald McCarroll Jr. paid at least 2 people to shoot his rival, Milton Milt Carter, as revenge for the 2020 murder of a man named Ryan Campbell. One of the hired hitmen, Reginald Dennis Allen Fluker, opened fire inside a nightclub but shot the wrong person, who died from their injuries. Fluker is currently serving a 30-year sentence for his crimes. Another suspect, 21-year-old Darius Dwayne Rosa, injured 6 people in 2 separate shootings. Additionally, he and fellow defendant Carmelo Cortez Morris Dirks were accused of killing another victim, 36-year-old Nicholas Craig, during a carjacking in Mississippi in late 2022. Both men are currently facing state-level first-degree murder charges for Craig's death. In the meantime, Carmelo Dirks has pleaded guilty in federal court to vehicle theft and was sentenced to 84 months in prison, while Rosa McCarroll, the mastermind and McCarroll's girlfriend, Lyteria Ishia Hollis, received mandatory life terms for their roles in the murder-for-hire conspiracy. Number 14. Peter Damjanovic. While responding to a residential call in August of 2023, police found 35-year-old mother of 3, Tiffany Woodley, dead with horrific injuries on the bathroom floor at her Perth, Australia home. In what authorities described as a case of extreme violence, she had been bludgeoned repeatedly in the head with a towel rod while trying to escape from her attacker. The emergency call was placed by Woodley's on and off boyfriend, 38-year-old Peter Damjanovic, whom the victim shared 2 children with. Woodley had obtained multiple restraining orders against Damjanovic following past instances of abuse throughout their relationship, with the most recent protective order being issued just 3 months before her death. Damjanovic reportedly confessed to killing Woodley during the call and was arrested at the scene. Despite his admission, he pleaded not guilty to Woodley's murder and is currently awaiting trial, which is scheduled for October of 2025. Number 13. Ruben Alvarado. On June 1st of 2019, the body of a 26-year-old transgender woman named Chynel Lindsey was pulled from the White Rock Lake Reservoir in Dallas, Texas after being spotted by a passerby. She had been beaten and strangled to death after exchanging text messages with a 24-year-old man named Ruben Alvarado. Cell phone location data, blood found in Alvarado's car, and other evidence later proved that he and Lindsey had met up on the day of the murder, leading to his arrest for first-degree murder. Alvarado took the stand in his own defense during his trial in late 2021, telling the jury that he had ordered Lindsey out of his vehicle after learning that she was biologically male. He claimed that Lindsey attacked him and that he had acted in self-defense when he choked her to death with a belt, but the story failed to persuade jurors of his innocence and he was found guilty as charged, resulting in a 37-year prison sentence. Records show that Alvarado will become eligible for parole in 2037, while listing a projected release date of 2056. Number 12. Gregory Valenzuela. Outraged by a grown man's alleged inappropriate conduct toward his young son during a gathering at a relative's Artesia, New Mexico home in May of 2016, 32-year-old Greg Valenzuela stabbed 48-year-old Adrian Acosta to death in a frenzied knife attack while the little boy looked on. He then threw the murder weapon, a cell phone, and his shoes and clothing into a fire pit in an effort to destroy evidence. Acosta was pronounced dead at the blood-covered scene. An autopsy found that he had been stabbed at least 12 times, including in the neck and back, causing fatal injuries to his jugular vein and windpipe. Valenzuela insisted that he was defending his son when he attacked Acosta, but prosecutors argued that the claim was baseless and charged him in connection with the homicide. During the trial in 2018, the state maintained its assertion that Acosta's actions were insufficient to prove that Valenzuela was provoked, while the defense accused the prosecution's star witness of being unreliable. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found Valenzuela guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of tampering with evidence, resulting in a mandatory life sentence. He challenged his conviction, arguing that the state had failed to prove that he acted with deliberate intent, but the appeals court disagreed, and the original ruling was upheld. Number 11. The murder of Dean Williamson. In early October of 2021, brothers Gareth Leach and Kyle Martin viciously attacked a disabled man at his suburban Rotherham, England home for stealing their mother's mobility scooter 6 days earlier. The victim, 45-year-old Dean Williamson, was found clinging to life and rushed to the hospital where he died from his injuries. Within days of the deadly assault, Leach and Martin were arrested in connection with the case. Prosecutors accused the pair of beating, kicking, and stomping on Williamson while arguing in court that the defendants had no legal right to exact vigilante justice against the victim, especially since the stolen scooter had been recovered prior to the attack. Gareth Leach, who was 28 years old at the time, denied any involvement in the crime and attempted to pin the blame on his 22-year-old brother. His claim was supported by his mother, 50-year-old Sarah Leach, and his girlfriend, 27-year-old Jessica Hammond, but police ultimately determined that the women were lying and charged them with perverting the course of justice. Sarah pleaded guilty and received a 2-year suspended sentence, while Hammond was acquitted at trial. Following a 3-week trial in April of 2022, Leach and Martin were acquitted of murder but convicted of manslaughter. They were both sentenced to 9 years in prison for their crimes, which were described by the judge as a cowardly, serious attack on a vulnerable victim by 2 able-bodied men. Number 10. The murder of John Hutchinson. After stealing a large amount of drugs from a gang in April of 2023, 44-year-old John Hutchinson was brutally assaulted at his home in the English town of Blackpool. Armed with a hammer, a metal bar, and a wooden pole, the attackers, later identified as 34-year-old Daniel Cunningham, 34-year-old David Bond, 33-year-old Lee Clark, and 47-year-old Darren McCabe, stormed into the residence and mercilessly bludgeoned the victim. Hutchinson initially survived and was able to speak to police, but collapsed and died from a ruptured spleen 2 hours later while being treated by paramedics. The assailants had fled the scene by the time law enforcement arrived, but were arrested over the following days after being identified as suspects in the case. In what the authorities described as a tit-for-tat revenge attack, the 4 men were attempting to retrieve the drugs Hutchinson had stolen and to exact retribution for the theft when they carried out the deadly attack. In early 2024, David Bond and Lee Clark were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life, with respective minimum terms of 27 and 24 years. Daniel Cunningham and Darren McCabe were convicted of manslaughter, resulting in an 18-year prison sentence for Cunningham and a 16-year term for McCabe. Number 9. Dominic Calabro. In July of 2018, police in Western Australia received a call from Dominic Calabro, who confessed to having a dead body at his home in Balga. Calabro told responding officers that the victim, 29-year-old Andrew Min Tran, had pushed him too far, stating, "It was either going to be him or me, and nobody touches me without consequences." Investigators gleaned a different story from the evidence, which indicated that Tran had been bound and tortured before having his throat slashed. But Calabro maintained his innocence, claiming that Tran had invaded his home and confronted him in a violent fashion. Prosecutors charged Calabro with murder, arguing that he killed Tran because he felt disrespected by the victim, while pointing out that the defendant was high on methamphetamine at the time of the killing, making him prone to paranoia. He was found guilty following a 3-week trial in October of 2019 and was sentenced to 23 years in prison. During the sentencing hearing, the judge acknowledged that Tran's behavior had gotten increasingly erratic in the days leading up to the killing, but that Calabro had had ample opportunity to distance himself from the victim. The judge also admonished Calabro for self-medicating his depression with illegal drugs that are known to cause extreme violence instead of seeking professional help. Number 8. Jonathan Moore. While performing a welfare check on a missing family of 3 in Matthews County, Virginia, in June of 2022, police found married couple Adam and Melissa Moore stabbed to death in their bedroom. Scrawled in blood on a nearby wall were the initials of their adult son, JTM. 24-year-old Jonathan Moore was conspicuously absent from the scene, and his father's pickup truck was missing from the driveway. Police located him at a hospital in Lynchburg, where he had recently received stitches for a head wound, and arrested him on a warrant for his parents' murders. Jonathan admitted to killing his mother and father with kitchen knives in an alcohol-induced fit of rage, but never provided any further details on what led up to the double homicide, leaving the circumstances of the case shrouded in mystery. Following his confession, he was charged with 2 counts each of first-degree murder and using a knife in the commission of a felony. In March of 2023, Moore pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 knife charge in exchange for the dismissal of the remaining counts, and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He'll be 62 years old when he reaches his projected release date of August 2060. Number 7. Rab Thomson. Determined to get payback on his ex-wife for leaving him after years of abuse, 50-year-old Rab Thomson stabbed the former couple's disabled adult daughter and young son to death in May of 2008. The victims' bodies were found in their beds by their mother, June, who discovered the carnage upon arriving home in the Scottish town of Buckhaven. 25-year-old Michelle Thompson, who had a learning disability, had been stabbed 12 times. Her younger brother, Ryan, had been stabbed 14 times while playing a computer game in the aftermath of the gory killings. June Thompson spoke out about the abuse she had suffered during her marriage to Rab and his threats to ruin her life if she dared to end their marriage. Her former husband had beaten her so frequently and severely that she suffered permanent damage to her health. Rab never showed any remorse for his actions and was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in prison after being found guilty of his children's murders. He became eligible for parole in 2025 and was denied, but will receive another chance at freedom next year, leaving June outraged at the country's criminal justice system and living in constant terror at the thought of her murderous ex-husband re-entering the free world. Number 6. The murder of Michael Phillips. In a brutal case of street justice that took place in the English town of Hartlepool in June of 2019, 39-year-old Mikey Phillips was savagely beaten to death at his home by a mob of attackers who wrongfully suspected him of burglary, led by 44-year-old millionaire businessman Neil Elliott. The gang inflicted more than 50 injuries on the victim, who they believed had robbed the home of Elliott's daughter the previous night. Outnumbered and desperate to survive, Phillips cowered helplessly near his fish tank while his attackers beat, kicked, and stomped on him. His injuries were so severe that his chest caved in while paramedics attempted to perform CPR. Police arrested 7 suspects who all denied killing Phillips. Following a 6-week trial in early 2020, Elliott was acquitted of murder but convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. 39-year-old co-defendant Anthony Small was found guilty of the same charge and sentenced to 12 years, while a third suspect, 32-year-old Lee Darby, received a 23-year minimum sentence for murder. 4 additional defendants were acquitted of all charges and walked free. During the hearing, the judge condemned Elliott and Darby for treating Phillips with contempt due to his drug addiction, while noting that the victim did not support his habit through theft and that there was no evidence that he had burglarized Elliott's daughter. Number 5. The murder of Dafron Canizales. A rude comment about a man's girlfriend quickly escalated into a deadly knife fight at the Randall's Island shelter for asylum seekers in New York City, where 35-year-old Dafron Canizales was stabbed to death in January of 2024. The altercation allegedly began after 25-year-old Moises Coronado insulted the victim's romantic partner, prompting Canizales to threaten him with a knife. According to police, Coronado retrieved a 5-inch blade from his room and attacked Canizales with 2 similarly armed accomplices, who were identified in reports as 33-year-old Fernández Horta and 27-year-old Anthony Navas. Authorities accused the trio of chasing the victim down with knives in hand, while an unarmed security guard helplessly looked on. The suspects cornered him in a doorway where police say Coronado stabbed him multiple times in the chest before asking security to let him finish the job. Coronado was charged with second-degree murder following his arrest. Both Hortas and Navas were charged with first-degree manslaughter, and Navas faces an additional charge of gang assault. All 3 defendants pleaded not guilty and their cases appear to be ongoing. Number 4. Lorna Middleton. During the early morning hours of June 26, 2020, Scottish police were summoned to a home in Clydebank, West Dunbartonshire, where they found 36-year-old Lorna Middleton cradling the bloody body of her husband, 38-year-old William Middleton. William had been stabbed in the heart and his face and neck were covered in scratches from a sharp instrument. Officers made the disturbing discovery while responding to calls about a fight happening outside the property. After noticing no initial signs of a disturbance, the police overheard faint screaming and followed the noise to the Middletons' flat, where they spent 20 minutes forcing their way into the home. Lorna was in a seemingly hysterical state and wouldn't stop screaming as officers took her into custody. Witnesses told investigators that Lorna had gotten angry with William at a house party earlier that night after he failed to back her up during an argument. Lorna was seen punching her husband several times in the head while a seemingly defeated William sat and cried. Yet she claimed she had acted in self-defense when she killed the victim. She also denied having any memory of the attack but was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Number 3. DeMarco Griffin. In an act of deadly violence that went viral after surveillance footage was leaked, 43-year-old Quandarius Woods was shot to death in May of 2023 during a brutal exchange of gunfire outside a Birmingham, Alabama public housing complex. Dozens of rounds were fired in just a minute's time, while the more than half-dozen people who were present at the scene dispersed in all directions. In the video, Woods could be seen collapsing as he ran across the parking lot. He got back up, but fell onto the pavement for a second time before the shooter stood over him and shot him several more times, firing several bullets into the man's head at point-blank range. Several days later, police arrested the suspected gunman, 28-year-old DeMarco Griffin, on suspicion of murder. He was indicted by a grand jury in early 2024 and remains held without bond at the Jefferson County Jail as he awaits the outcome of his case. Today's topic was requested by Who Day All Day. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Erica Pereira da Silveira Vicente. During the early morning hours of April 11, 2025, military police in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais responded to reports of 2 suspects who were seen dumping a body in a wooded area. At the scene, officers discovered the charred and mutilated remains of 47-year-old Everton Amaro da Silva. He had been beaten and stabbed to death and his genitals had been cut off. Investigators followed a trail of blood from the victim's body to the nearby home of his on and off romantic partner, 42-year-old Erica Pereira da Silveira Vicente, who confessed to killing Everton because she suspected him of trying to seduce her daughter. After catching the man in a questionable situation with the teen, Erica had pretended not to notice and drugged his beer with a sleeping pill. As soon as the victim fell asleep, she severed his privates, stuffed them in his mouth, then stabbed and bludgeoned him to death. With help from an unnamed teenager who was in the household at the time of the murder, Erica then carried Everton's lifeless body into the forest and set him ablaze. She was arrested shortly after the discovery of his remains and is currently in custody while police have been unable to locate her accomplice. The aunt of Everton's alleged victim denied that he abused the girl but admitted that he had harassed her during the night, leaving the specific nature of the alleged abuse unclear. Number 1. The murders of Dom Ansar and Ben Gillam Rice. In October of 2019, British teenagers and best friends Dom Ansar and Ben Gillam Rice were ambushed by a gang and stabbed to death during a birthday party in the city of Milton Keynes. Ansar sustained nearly 50 injuries and Gillam Rice was stabbed 6 times in the knife attack, while 2 surviving male victims were critically injured. The double homicide was carried out as payback for the previous beating of another teenage boy, who was stripped of his clothing and humiliated in a video that had been leaked on social media 3 years earlier. 5 suspects were charged in connection with the case, including the teen who was targeted in the previous assault. The parties involved in the murders of Ansar and Gillam Rice were reportedly members of rival gangs, according to police who said that the attackers attended the party after learning that the victims were there. 23-year-old defendant Earl Bevins pleaded guilty to his role in the murders in 2020 and was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years in prison. Co-defendants Clayton Barker, Charlie Chandler, Ben Potter and Jamie Chandler took their cases to trial and were all found guilty of murder, resulting in life sentences with non-parole periods ranging between 22 and 28 years. Thanks for watching. What topic would you like to see next? Be sure to let us know in the comment section below.